I stood behind an inch of soundproof reinforced glass, a flute of vintage Blanc de Noir resting cool against my palm. Far below my vantage point at the main entrance of the Whispering Pines Reserve, the scene unfolded like a silent film. My mother Catherine clawed at the wrought iron security gate. Even from this distance, I could see the frantic movement of her mouth, the tendons straining in her neck as she screamed at Marcus, my head of security. She wore an emerald silk gown that cost more than her mortgage payment, a desperate attempt to look like she belonged inside. Beside her, my younger sister Lexi pounded her fists against the hood of their SUV, her own bridal glow replaced by panicked fury. They were locked out of the social event of the decade. They also had no idea they were locked out of my property. To understand how my family ended up shivering in the Montana twilight, barred from a multi-million-dollar estate by a former Navy SEAL, you have to rewind 6 months. Before I go on, if this story hits close to home, take a moment to like and subscribe to Sophia Vengeance, but only if you genuinely connect. Drop a comment with your age and let me know if you have ever been the family scapegoat. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in Whitefish. My fiancé Ethan sat at our kitchen island typing code for his software startup, while I organized spreadsheets for our upcoming wedding. We had a comfortable, unassuming life. We drove 5-year-old sedans and bought our coffee beans in bulk. I opened a new browser tab and logged into the joint savings portal. This was the account tied to the trust my late grandfather established a decade ago. He had deposited $85,000 specifically earmarked for my future wedding. As the page refreshed, the loading icon spun for a fraction of a second before the balance materialized in bold black text on the screen, $142. I blinked, the cursor hovering over the numbers. I refreshed the page. The digits remained unchanged. A cold, precise focus settled over me. I dialed the branch manager, a woman named Diane, who had known my parents for years. When she answered, her tone was bright, entirely untroubled. "Oh, Hazel, good morning. Yes, Catherine came in yesterday. She processed a wire transfer for the balance. She said she needed it right away to secure a deposit for Lexi's big day. Said you girls had talked about it." Lexi's big day. I repeated, my voice steady. "Yes, the Prescott wedding. Such an exciting time for your family." I thanked Diane and hung up. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't fall to the kitchen floor in tears. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out the original manila folder containing my grandfather's trust documents. Catherine was the executor of the trust until I turned 30, or married, whichever came first. It was an old-fashioned legal structure, one my mother had just exploited through a technical loophole by claiming the withdrawal fell under general family wedding expenses. She thought she had outsmarted me. She assumed, like always, that her quiet, compliant eldest daughter would simply swallow the loss to keep the peace. But Catherine had never bothered to read page 14, section 4 of the trust agreement. My grandfather, a man who built his fortune anticipating human greed, had included a penalty clause. Any funds misappropriated by the executor before the beneficiary's 30th birthday were subject to repayment at 3 times the original value provided the beneficiary filed a formal contest. I slid the document back into the folder. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. A confrontation now would only yield excuses and gaslighting. I wanted more than my money back. I wanted to dismantle the illusion she valued above her own children. I closed the drawer. The trap was loaded. Now I just needed to hand her the rope. The drive from Whitefish down to Kalispell offered 30 minutes of winding asphalt and jagged mountain horizons to process the betrayal. I steered my 5-year-old Subaru through the dense corridors of Douglas firs, my grip tight on the leather wheel. The ragged peaks of the Rockies loomed in the distance, a stark contrast to the artificial manicured reality my parents insisted on maintaining. I pulled up the long driveway of their sprawling ranch house. To any casual observer driving past the wrought iron mailbox, the property projected undeniable generational wealth. The structure featured a wraparound cedar porch, towering stone chimneys and floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the bright afternoon sun. But I knew the unvarnished truth beneath the pristine landscaping. My father, William, had refinanced the estate 3 separate times just to fund Catherine's country club dues and Lexi's endless parade of designer outfits. The foundation of their life was literally built on a mountain of high-interest debt. I bypassed the heavy brass knocker and walked straight through the oak front door. The scent of expensive lavender diffusers hit my senses, a fragrant mask intended to hide the stale financial anxiety that always hung in the hallways. I did not call out a greeting. I followed the sound of clinking ice and soft chatter toward the rear of the house. I found them in the sunroom bathed in natural light. Catherine and Lexi were draped across the white linen sectionals, looking less like a mother and daughter and more like 2 generals plotting a military campaign. A sea of glossy bridal magazines, imported fabric swatches, and scattered floral arrangements covered the mahogany coffee table. Lexi held a piece of ivory silk against her wrist, evaluating the sheen under the sunlight, her oversized engagement ring catching the glare. My mother tapped a silver pen against her lips, reviewing a stack of thick cardstock menus. I did not offer a polite hello. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, opened the banking application, and placed the illuminated screen directly over the catering menu my mother was studying. $142. My mother blinked, her gaze shifting from the screen to my face. She did not flinch. She did not display a single ounce of guilt or shame. She merely looked inconvenienced by the interruption. She pushed the phone aside with a manicured finger. "Where is it, Mom?" I asked, keeping my tone leveled into a flat, unbroken line. "Where is the $85,000 Grandpa left for me?" Catherine let out a long, practiced sigh, adjusting her posture on the linen cushions. "Hazel, please do not start a scene today. Your sister is under an immense amount of pressure trying to finalize these details." "My sister is not the one missing her entire wedding fund," I replied. I pressed my fingernails into my palms to hide the slight tremor in my hands. The audacity of her shifting the victimhood to Lexi within 10 seconds was breathtaking. Lexi rolled her eyes, dropping the silk swatch onto the table. "Oh my God, Hazel, stop being so selfish. You know I am marrying into the Prescott family. They expect a certain caliber of event. You and Ethan do not." "Lexi is right," Catherine interjected, her voice taking on that familiar patronizing lilt she reserved exclusively for me. "The Prescotts are venture capitalists. Their guest list includes senators, regional bank presidents, and high-profile executives. Our family needs to present a unified, polished front. We have to match their standing in the community." Catherine stood up, walking over to the wet bar to pour herself another glass of sparkling water. She spoke to me with her back turned, tossing the words over her shoulder like scraps to a dog. "You and Ethan are sweet, but let us be realistic here. You drive a beat-up station wagon. He wears hooded sweatshirts to dinner. You work for that little boutique firm doing whatever it is you do. You do not run in those circles. A lavish wedding would just look foolish on you." She turned around, taking a slow sip from her crystal glass. Her eyes scanned my plain denim jeans, my unbranded cotton sweater, and my scuffed boots. It was a look of pure, unadulterated pity. "You can get married at the courthouse," she suggested smoothly. "Maybe host a nice dinner at a local restaurant afterward. Keep it simple. You do not need all that." I stood frozen on the Persian rug staring at the woman who gave birth to me. For 29 years, she had meticulously trained me to function as the emotional shock absorber for this family. I was the practical one, the low-maintenance daughter expected to require zero resources so Lexi could consume every drop of their attention and money. When I graduated college with honors, they skipped the ceremony because Lexi had a minor cheerleading competition. When I bought my first modest home, they complained it was too far of a drive for them to visit. They always expected me to absorb the blow to shrink myself so the golden child could shine brighter. Catherine assumed my plain clothes and older vehicle were symptoms of a stagnant, uninspired life. She assumed I was scraping by. She had no idea that my little boutique business was Sierra Peak Holdings LLC. Over the past 6 years, I had quietly built an 8-figure real estate development portfolio, acquiring luxury hospitality properties across the Pacific Northwest. I wore basic clothes because my time was better spent closing multi-million-dollar commercial acquisitions than browsing luxury boutiques. I drove a reliable older car because true wealth does not need to announce itself to strangers. Ethan was cut from the exact same cloth. My parents saw a guy in a hoodie and assumed he was a struggling entry-level programmer. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that his software startup had recently secured Series B funding, valuing his company well over $100 million. Catherine and William were so blinded by the shiny veneer of the local country club hierarchy that they never bothered to ask what we actually did for a living. They never inquired about my days, my goals, or my investments. They only saw what pertained to their own social climbing. I could have dropped the facade right there. I could have pulled up my actual investment accounts, handed her the portfolio showing my ownership of half the commercial properties in Flathead County, and watched the color drain from her face. I could have screamed at them for stealing my grandfather's final gift. But looking at them now, surrounded by their rented elegance and borrowed status, a different kind of clarity washed over me. If I exposed my wealth today, Catherine would instantly shift gears. She would find a way to manipulate the narrative. She would likely claim she transferred the trust money to Lexi because she knew I was rich enough to afford my own wedding. Worse, she would try to latch onto my success, demanding Ethan and I fund the Prescott spectacle to save her and William from their crippling debts. I refused to give her that exit. I wanted them to reveal the true depths of their greed. I wanted them to build their fragile house of cards as high as humanly possible before the wind picked up. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the fiery anger recede into a cold, hardened resolve. I picked up my phone from the glass table and slipped it back into my pocket. I looked my mother in the eye. I crafted a serene, accepting smile, the exact kind of smile she expected from a defeated, compliant daughter. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice gentle, devoid of any friction. "Lexi has much higher expectations to meet. A big wedding would be a waste for us. I will keep it simple." The tension in the sunroom evaporated in an instant. Catherine let out a soft laugh, her rigid shoulders dropping in profound relief. She walked over and patted my arm, a physical gesture that felt more like a dismissal than an embrace. "I knew you would understand, Hazel. You have always been so practical." Lexi beamed from the couch, already turning her attention back to the thick bridal magazines. "Thanks, Hayes. I promise to show you all the photos. It is going to be the wedding of the century." "Sure." I turned and walked out of the sunroom, leaving them to their fabric swatches and delusions. As I exited the heavy front doors, the gravel crunching under my boots, the crisp mountain air filled my lungs. They smirked in my wake, victorious, believing they had secured their path to high society using my stolen inheritance. They had no idea they had just declared war on the one person holding the deed to their social survival. I gripped the steering wheel of my car, the leather cool beneath my hands. The game was in motion. But how long could I keep my empire a secret while they bled themselves dry trying to impress people I already owned? 21 days passed since I surrendered my pride in my parents' sunlit living room. I spent those 3 weeks channeling every ounce of frustration into my business empire. On a brisk Thursday morning, Ethan and I sat at our reclaimed wood dining table nursing black coffee. He typed complex lines of code for his latest software update, his focus unbroken. I reviewed architectural blueprints for a new eco-resort project in Aspen. The quiet rhythm of our shared ambition provided a sanctuary from the toxicity I had grown up enduring. Then my phone vibrated against the polished timber surface. It was an Instagram notification. My sister had tagged me in a new post. I tapped the screen, opening the application. A high-resolution drone photograph filled my display, showcasing an imposing stone manor nestled against a jagged, snow-dusted mountainside. Tall glass windows reflected the surrounding alpine forest, and a pristine lake shimmered in the foreground. The caption beneath the image read, "Secured the dream venue for the Prescott wedding. Glacier Peaks Lodge, here we come." My chest tightened. A sharp intake of cold air catching in my throat. This was not just any luxury estate. It was the precise property I had spent weeks vetting for my own ceremony. A memory clicked into place. I remembered leaving my tablet on the kitchen counter during a family dinner a month prior. Lexi had offered to clear the plates, a rare gesture of helpfulness. She must have swiped through my browser history, found my private wedding vision board, and read my email exchanges with the estate coordinator. She took my meticulous research and weaponized it. I tapped her contact name and dialed. The line rang twice before she answered with a breathless, triumphant greeting. "Did you see the post?" she asked, a heavy layer of smugness radiating through the speaker. "Lexi," I said, maintaining a neutral, unbothered tone. "That is the lodge I toured last month. I told you I loved that space." She let out a high-pitched giggle, a sound sharp enough to scrape glass. "Oh, Hazel, please do not be jealous. Be realistic. The coordinator told me the deposit alone was $20,000. It is entirely out of your budget anyway. You should be glad the family gets to experience it." She had literally used my stolen trust fund to pay her invoice. She hijacked my money to steal my dream, and she expected me to applaud her for it. But here is where the universe delivered a masterpiece of poetic irony. Lexi had no idea who she was actually writing those checks to. Glacier Peaks Lodge operated under a regional hospitality group known as Apex Hospitality 3 months ago. Sierra Peak Holdings, my company, executed a hostile takeover of Apex. The paperwork had cleared quietly behind closed boardroom doors. I owned the land. I owned the stone manor. I owned the 50 acres of pristine alpine forest surrounding it. The deed sat in a fireproof safe inside my home office. I was secretly my sister's landlord. When Catherine wired that stolen deposit to secure the date, she effectively routed my grandfather's money right back into my corporate revenue stream. I ended the phone call with a soft congratulation, hanging up and staring out my window at the Montana sky. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. 2 weeks later, Catherine insisted I attend a vendor walkthrough at the lodge. She framed it as a chance for me to take notes for my own courthouse gathering, a thinly veiled excuse to parade Lexi's elevated status in front of me. I wore a faded denim jacket and sensible boots, perfectly playing the role of the underprivileged older sister. We stood in the grand ballroom surrounded by vaulted timber ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the rugged peaks. Lexi stood in the center of the room, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. She was berating the estate operations manager, a seasoned professional named Sarah. "I said a crisp lotus fold," Lexi shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the mahogany walls. "These napkins look like crumpled paper bags. Do you understand who my future in-laws are? The Prescotts will not dine on garbage." Sarah maintained a rigid professional posture, her face a mask of practiced patience. But Sarah knew exactly who I was. We had sat in a boardroom in Seattle just 2 weeks prior, discussing first quarter profit margins and staff retention. I saw the strain in Sarah's jaw, the slight flinch, as Lexi hurled another insult about the catering team being incompetent. Sarah's eyes darted past my mother's shoulder, locking directly onto mine. It was a silent, desperate plea. She was waiting for the executive order. One word from me and Sarah would tear up the contract, refund the stolen money, and have security escort my sister off the property. Catherine stood nearby, nodding along with Lexi's tantrum, enabling the mistreatment of my employee. The power resting in my hands felt electric. I could end the charade right there. I could reveal my ownership, humiliate them in front of the vendors, and reclaim my venue. But ending it now would be too easy. It would spare them the real consequences of their vanity. I held Sarah's gaze across the sunlit ballroom. I offered a microscopic nod, just a fraction of a tilt of my chin. The silent command translated clearly. "Let it go. Endure the tantrum." Sarah blinked a subtle acknowledgement and turned back to my sister with a renewed robotic apology. Lexi smirked triumphant, believing she had asserted her dominance over the staff. She turned to me, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "You have to be firm with these people, Hazel. They will walk all over you if you let them. Take notes." I nodded earnestly, pulling a small notebook from my pocket. "I am paying very close attention, Lexi," I replied, writing down nothing. I wanted her to spend every single stolen dime on this borrowed fantasy. I wanted her to obsess over imported orchids and custom ice sculptures, blissfully oblivious that she was throwing a temper tantrum inside her own sister's house. The delusion was a beautiful, self-sustaining fire, and I was more than happy to supply the oxygen. But luxury event planning requires immense liquid capital. The $85,000 was a vast sum, but in the hands of an entitled bride trying to impress a family of venture capitalists, it was evaporating like water on a hot skillet. The floral budget alone had doubled. The custom lighting rigs were draining the reserves faster than my parents could track. I watched my father pace the edge of the ballroom, his phone glued to his ear, his complexion turning a sickly shade of gray as he argued with a credit card representative. The stolen funds were running dry. With the Prescott family demanding an ever-increasing level of extravagance, a harsh reality was speeding toward my parents. Their fraudulent safety net was disintegrating. When the accounts finally hit zero, who would they attempt to bleed next? Exactly 60 days remained before Lexi was scheduled to walk down the aisle. The Montana summer was beginning to thaw the mountain passes, bringing a false sense of warmth to the valley. But the atmosphere inside my family was freezing over. I was sitting in my home office reviewing quarterly tax projections for my commercial properties when my mobile phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. The caller identification displayed my father's name. William rarely called me directly. His communication style usually consisted of passive-aggressive group messages orchestrated by my mother. When I answered, there was no customary greeting, no inquiry about my day or my health. His voice carried the unmistakable hollow rasp of a man staring at a declined credit card terminal. "We have a cash flow issue, Hazel," he announced. He did not phrase it as a request or an admission of guilt. He spoke as if reporting a weather event that I was somehow responsible for fixing. "The Prescott family is insisting on a top-tier premium open bar featuring imported spirits. Lexi had to secure a vintage diamond headpiece to match her custom gown because the original veil looked too cheap. The initial budget is exhausted. We need $15,000 by Friday. I stared at the blinking cursor on my computer screen. The $85,000 from my grandfather was gone. It had evaporated into a mist of imported white peonies, customized silk drapery hand-dyed to match bridal fabrics, and a rented tiara designed to make my sister look like royalty. Now standing in the ashes of the trust fund they had illegally drained, my father was demanding more. "I know you are on a tight courthouse budget." My father continued, his tone hardening into an authoritative bark. "But Ethan works in tech. He has a steady paycheck. Tell him to take out a personal loan. You two have zero overhead right now living in that modest house. It is for your sister. You need to step up and support the family." I looked at the financial projections on my monitor. My real estate company had just cleared a net profit margin that would make my father weep, and he was ordering my fiancé to take on high-interest debt to fund liquor for venture capitalists. I could hear the desperation rattling in his chest. The facade was cracking. "I cannot do that, Dad," I said, keeping my voice mild and unbothered. "Ethan and I are saving every penny for our own ceremony. We cannot take on a loan right now. You will have to cut back on the bar or return the tiara." He scoffed loudly, the sound vibrating through the speaker. "You are just as selfish as your mother said. Enjoy your cheap little gathering." Needs time, eh?" The line went dead. I placed the phone down, feeling a familiar dull ache in my chest. However, that sorrow was quickly overshadowed by the arrival of an entirely different kind of family. That evening, Ethan's parents, Clara and David, flew in from Austin, Texas. David was a retired federal judge with a sharp mind and a gentle, observant demeanor. Clara was a retired pediatrician who wore minimal makeup and favored comfortable linen trousers over designer labels. They possessed the kind of quiet, multi-generational wealth that never needed to announce itself to strangers. They did not care about country club social hierarchies or zip codes. They cared about character. We hosted them for dinner at our house, serving a simple roast chicken and fresh garden vegetables. As we sat around the dining table, the warmth in the room felt foreign to me. There was no posturing, no hidden agendas, no critical glances measuring my worth against my siblings. During dessert, David asked a polite question about my parents and the wedding preparations. I could have lied to preserve the peace, but Ethan placed his hand over mine, giving my fingers a supportive squeeze. I told them the truth. I explained the drained joint account, the stolen inheritance, and the bizarre double life I was maintaining to protect my business empire from their insatiable greed. David set his fork down, his brow furrowing with professional concern. "Hazel, that is blatant trust fraud," he stated calmly. "I can have my former colleagues in civil litigation draft a demand letter by tomorrow morning. We can freeze their assets." I smiled, deeply touched by his immediate instinct to defend me. "Thank you, David, but I have a different strategy. I need them to play their hand fully." Clara reached across the table and placed a small velvet box in front of me. The fabric was worn at the corners, soft with age and history. "Open it," she urged gently. Inside lay a stunning double-strand pearl necklace. The pearls were perfectly matched, glowing with a soft, iridescent warmth under the dining room pendant lights. The clasp was intricate antique gold, crafted with a level of artistry that modern jewelers rarely replicated. "These belong to my great-grandmother," Clara explained, her voice thick with emotion. "I wore them on my wedding day. I want you to have them for our real daughter. For..." Tears pricked my eyes, the first genuine tears I had shed in months. The pearls symbolized everything my biological family lacked: They represented history, authenticity, and unpretentious love. They were the exact opposite of Lexi's rented flashy diamond tiara. I fastened them around my neck, the cool weight of the gems grounding me in the reality that I was finally part of a family that valued me for simply existing. The respite, however, was brief. The following afternoon, Ethan snapped a candid photograph of me wearing the pearls while we walked through a local botanical garden. He posted it to his social media page, a harmless tribute to his future wife. It took less than 3 hours for the image to filter its way through the digital grapevine and land on my sister's glowing screen. My phone rang while I was reviewing catering contracts for my own secret event. Lexi's name flashed on the caller identification. I answered, bracing for the inevitable storm. "Where did you get that necklace?" she demanded, bypassing any form of standard greeting. Her voice was shrill, vibrating with frantic entitlement. "I saw Ethan's post. Those are real, are they not? They look vintage." "They are a gift from Clara," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "A family heirloom." "Perfect," Lexi declared, speaking as if my personal possessions were simply excess inventory in her bridal warehouse. "I need them. The diamond headpiece is too heavy, and it is giving me a headache during my dress fittings. I need something elegant but understated for the reception. I am going to wear your pearls as my something borrowed. Send them overnight to Kalispell tomorrow morning." She did not ask. She ordered. Lexi had stolen my venue, drained my $85,000 trust fund, and hijacked my grandfather's final gift. Now she felt entitled to the one sacred item my future mother-in-law had given me. "No," I said. The single syllable sliced through the air like a steel blade. Silence stretched over the phone line, thick and heavy. "Excuse me," she hissed. "I am the bride. You are having a pathetic park barbecue. You do not even need fine jewelry. You are being incredibly greedy. The pearls stay with me, Lexi. Good luck with your headpiece." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the desk. 10 minutes later, my voicemail inbox pinged. It was Catherine. I played the audio aloud in my quiet office. Her voice dripped with pure, concentrated venom. "Hazel, you are a vindictive, jealous failure. Your sister is under tremendous stress, and you are hoarding a piece of jewelry just to be spiteful. You have always envied her. You are a terrible sister and an even worse daughter. Do not expect any favors from us." Before the voicemail even finished playing its toxic message, a text arrived from Lexi. The letters glared up at me from the illuminated screen. "You will regret saying no to me. Watch your back." She was furious that I had denied her a shiny object. The golden child was not accustomed to hearing the word no, and her entitlement knew no bounds. I locked my phone and stared out the window at the setting sun. My sister had just issued a direct threat. The war had escalated from stolen money to personal sabotage. What was her next move going to be? And how close would it bring my entire secret empire to the brink of exposure? Lexi's threat hovered in the air for days, a toxic cloud threatening to rain on the quiet life Ethan and I had cultivated. She promised I would regret keeping the pearls, and my sister was not one to make empty threats. I needed a shield. I needed to ensure my parents remained so utterly convinced of my financial mediocrity that they would never bother digging into my actual wedding preparations. They needed bait, and I was going to serve it to them on a silver platter. I drove down to the local Parks and Recreation Department building and picked up a trifold informational brochure for the Whitefish Municipal Park Pavilion. The pamphlet was printed on cheap, glossy paper, featuring a photograph of a cracked concrete slab covered by a rusted aluminum roof. Picnic tables with peeling green paint sat scattered across patchy grass. It was the kind of venue you rented for $75 to host a child's birthday party. I brought the brochure home and placed it strategically on my kitchen counter, right next to a bowl of fresh apples and a stack of mail. I knew my mother would not be able to resist snooping the next time she visited. The opportunity arrived 3 days later. Catherine dropped by unannounced, breezing through my front door to complain about Lexi's caterer having the audacity to charge an installation fee for a swan-shaped ice sculpture as she paced my kitchen. Her eyes darted around, cataloging my modest appliances. Then her gaze snagged on the glossy pamphlet. She stopped pacing. She reached out, pinching the corner of the paper between her thumb and index finger, as if the brochure itself carried a contagious disease. She lifted it to eye level, her lips curling upward into a razor-sharp sneer. "A municipal park pavilion, Hazel?" she asked, the pitch of her voice dripping with artificial pity. "Is this really where you plan to host your reception?" I kept my expression perfectly neutral, scrubbing a coffee mug in the sink. "Ethan and I are trying to be financially responsible, Mom. We think a casual afternoon barbecue will be nice. We can grill hot dogs and hamburgers, keep things relaxed." Catherine dropped the brochure back onto the granite counter. She let out a soft, triumphant chuckle. The sound was a physical manifestation of her ego inflating. She fully bought the illusion. In her mind, the contrast between Lexi's imported orchids at Glacier Peaks Lodge and my imaginary hot dogs on paper plates cemented her worldview. She was the matriarch of a superior golden child, and I was the unfortunate destitute afterthought. Her complacency was sealed. She would not ask another question about my plans. With the decoy venue firmly established, the timeline narrowed down to 4 months before the weddings. I decided to offer my mother one final genuine olive branch. It was a test of maternal love, a final opportunity for her to show up for her eldest daughter. I booked a dress fitting at a small, unassuming bridal boutique in downtown Kalispell. It was the kind of shop with flickering fluorescent lights, cramped fitting rooms, and racks stuffed with stiff synthetic fabrics. I sent Catherine a text message inviting her to join me at noon on a Saturday. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji promising she would be there. I arrived at 11:45. The shop smelled faintly of floor wax and stale potpourri. I sat on a faded pink velvet sofa near the front window, watching the pedestrians stroll down Main Street. Noon arrived. Then 12:30. A young shop assistant named Jenna brought me a paper cup of lukewarm water, her eyes full of quiet, agonizing pity. I could hear another bride in the adjacent fitting room laughing with her mother, their joyous tears echoing through the thin walls. Every burst of their laughter felt like a needle pressing into my ribs. By 1:30, I was standing in front of a 3-way mirror, wearing a heavy, itchy gown that fit poorly across my shoulders. I stared at my own reflection, my face pale under the harsh lighting. My phone buzzed inside my purse. I stepped off the pedestal and retrieved the device. It was a picture message from Catherine. The image showed my mother and Lexi sitting in plush leather chairs at a high-end bridal salon down in Missoula. They were clinking crystal flutes filled with expensive champagne. Lexi was laughing, her hair perfectly styled. The text beneath the photo read, "Crisis with Lexi's rehearsal dress. Had to rush down here to fix it. Yours is just off the rack anyway, right? Just send a picture." There was no apology. There was no question mark. It was a simple, brutal statement of my insignificance. She had abandoned me in a dusty shop while she drank champagne 2 hours away, all to fix a minor wardrobe inconvenience for a rehearsal dinner. I did not reply. I did not shed a single tear. Standing in that cramped fitting room, the wounded inner child who had spent nearly 3 decades begging for her mother's validation simply closed her eyes and stopped fighting. The grief evaporated, replaced by a profound, freezing clarity. The emotional severing was finalized. I mourned the mother I never had, and the cold strategist within me took the wheel. I unzipped the synthetic gown, handed it back to a sympathetic Jenna, left a generous tip for her patience, and walked out into the crisp Montana afternoon. I drove straight to the Glacier Park International Airport, bypassing the main terminal and heading directly for the private aviation hangars. Ethan was standing on the tarmac next to a sleek chartered twin-engine jet. He wore a crisp dark shirt and tailored trousers, holding 2 coffees. He took one look at my face as I stepped out of my car. He did not ask where my mother was. He did not offer useless platitudes. He simply handed me a coffee, kissed the top of my head, and led me up the stairs of the aircraft. 2 hours later, we touched down in Los Angeles. A private car whisked us away to a discreet ivy-covered atelier in Beverly Hills. I was not buying a dress off the rack. I had secured an appointment with one of the top haute couture designers in the global fashion industry, a woman who dressed royalty and film icons. Stepping into her studio was like entering a different dimension. The air smelled of fresh lilies and expensive silk. The designer draped me in layers of hand-woven French organza, pinning delicate custom pearl beadwork that mirrored the vintage necklace Clara had given me. The gown we crafted that afternoon was a breathtaking masterpiece of architecture and fabric. It cost more than Lexi's entire stolen floral budget, paid for entirely by my own hard-earned wealth. I stood on the plush pedestal in Beverly Hills, sipping real champagne from a crystal flute, looking at the warrior reflecting in the mirror. I was building my own armor. My biological family had made their choice, and I was finally at peace with leaving them behind in the dust of their own arrogance. I returned to Montana feeling lighter, unburdened by the desperate need to be loved by people incapable of loving me. But as the weeks ticked closer to the wedding dates, I realized my quiet acceptance was a one-sided treaty. Catherine was not satisfied with merely ignoring my existence. She needed to ensure my perceived failure was absolute. She was about to launch a calculated strike designed to guarantee my little park barbecue was a lonely, empty humiliation. The financial strain weighing on my parents had reached a critical threshold. The stolen trust fund was a finite resource long since drained by imported orchids and custom ice sculptures. William's credit limits were stretched to their breaking point. To fund the remaining vendor invoices and maintain the illusion of unlimited wealth for the Prescott family, my mother needed a new revenue stream. She found her target in my father's extended relatives. The Sanchez clan was scattered across the Pacific Northwest, possessing several uncles and cousins who operated logistics companies and owned vast tracts of commercial farmland. They were exactly the type of guests who arrived at receptions with thick envelopes containing checks written with commas. Catherine needed to ensure those envelopes ended up in Lexi's bridal card box, not mine. To accomplish this redirection of wealth, Catherine initiated a systematic, calculated character assassination. She spent her afternoons sitting on her back patio, a glass of Pinot Noir in her hand, dialing every aunt, uncle, and second cousin in the digital contact directory. She painted a tragic, deeply humiliating portrait of my current existence. She told them Ethan's software startup had collapsed under poor management and shifting market trends. She claimed we were practically destitute, drowning in debt, and refusing to ask for professional help out of stubborn pride. "My wedding," she whispered conspiratorially into the receiver, "was going to be a depressing, bare-bones potluck in a public space." She urged them to save their travel funds and their generous gifts for Lexi's proper celebration at the lodge. Attending my park gathering, Catherine argued, would only embarrass me and force me to confront my own failures. She framed her sabotage as an act of maternal mercy. I discovered her treacherous narrative on a rainy Thursday afternoon. My mobile device vibrated across my mahogany desk, displaying the name of my favorite relative, Aunt Vivian. Vivian was my father's older sister, a pragmatic, no-nonsense woman who ran a highly successful cattle ranch near Bozeman. She was the only family member who had consistently remembered my birthdays without a calendar reminder. When I answered the call, there was no cheerful greeting. There was only the sound of stifled weeping.
"Hazel."
"Honey," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Why did you not tell me things were so bad?" I pushed my leather chair away from the glowing monitors, my brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "What do you mean, Vivian? Your mother called me yesterday. She told me Ethan lost his investors. She said you two might face eviction before the end of the month. I want to pay your rent." "Hazel, I am wiring you $10,000 right now. Please do not argue with me. I cannot stand the thought of you struggling like this." My vision blurred for a fraction of a second. The sheer cruelty of my mother's fabrication struck me like a physical blow to the sternum. She was not just ignoring my life milestone. She was actively destroying my reputation to fund my sister's vanity project. She was leveraging my aunt's genuine love and twisting it into a financial pipeline for Lexi. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my erratic pulse before responding. "Vivian, listen to me very carefully." I instructed, my tone dropping into a calm, authoritative register. "Ethan and I are fine. We are more than fine. Do not wire me anything. And do not send Catherine a single dime for that other wedding. But your mother said your reception is a potluck. She said you could not afford catering and that you were too proud to accept a loan." I closed my eyes, pressing the bridge of my nose. I could not reveal the entire truth, not over an unsecured phone line. But I could not let a woman who genuinely cared for me suffer under Catherine's fiction. "I am going to send you a secure digital link tomorrow," I told her softly. "You will need a specific password to open it. I promise you I am not serving hot dogs in a public park. Just trust me for a little while longer." Ending the call, I realized the precarious, fragile nature of my double life. Keeping a multi-million-dollar secret in a state where high society circles frequently overlapped required military-grade logistics. While Catherine spun tales of my poverty, my actual event planner was finalizing accommodations for 300 of the most influential individuals in the country. Our guest list included Silicon Valley titans, commercial real estate magnates, and private equity directors. You cannot simply invite 300 power players to a hidden Montana estate without raising eyebrows. To maintain the veil of secrecy, my firm framed the wedding as a highly secure, unplugged corporate summit. Every vendor, catering assistant, and confirmed attendee signed a strict non-disclosure agreement. We cited corporate security protocols and the protection of unreleased intellectual property to justify the extreme measures. In the circles, Ethan and I navigated NDA. These were standard operating procedure. No one questioned the need for total discretion. They merely handed over their communication devices at the door and respected the embargo. With the perimeter secured, I finalized two distinct, diametrically opposed sets of invitations. For the few extended family members I genuinely wanted by my side, like Aunt Vivian, Ethan utilized his tech expertise to program encrypted digital invites. The software required a unique biometric login and self-destructed the viewing link 24 hours after opening. The design was sleek, elegant, and sworn to strict secrecy. For Catherine William Lexi. And the relatives who had enthusiastically bought into the smear campaign, I utilized a free generic online platform. I selected a cheap template featuring cartoon picnic baskets, checkered tablecloths, and cheerful yellow sunflowers. I typed the minimal details for a 2:00 afternoon barbecue at the Whitefish Municipal Park Pavilion. I hit send, and watched my email inbox. The rejections poured in with breathtaking speed. My parents RSVP'd no within 12 minutes. The notification chimed on my computer, a sharp metallic sound that echoed in my quiet office. The extended family members who valued country club status over familial loyalty quickly followed suit. They cited scheduling conflicts, travel fatigue, and the necessity to recover from Lexi's post-wedding brunch. In reality, they were washing their hands of the destitute relative. They wanted no part in a celebration that lacked champagne and crystal. Every rejection notification felt like a surgical incision, cleanly and permanently severing the infected branches from my family tree. I sat at my desk watching the digital responses pile up, feeling a strange, intoxicating mixture of sorrow and profound liberation. They had officially opted out of my life. The decoy strategy had worked flawlessly. They were entirely focused on the Prescott spectacle, leaving me alone to construct the most exclusive event the region had ever seen. Or so I believed. When you build a fortress of deception, the greatest threat never comes from a frontal assault. It comes from a single overlooked detail left unattended inside the walls, a misplaced document, an accidental paper trail. You can control 300 billionaires with a non-disclosure agreement, but you cannot control the sheer unpredictability of an entitled mother looking for an excuse to criticize her daughter. 6 weeks before the ceremonies were scheduled to commence, my carefully constructed illusion encountered a near-fatal flaw. I had successfully insulated my empire from their prying eyes, but maintaining that insulation required flawless execution. One tiny slip could shatter the entire charade, destroying the poetic justice I had spent months orchestrating. And that slip was currently sitting right on my dining room table, waiting for the worst possible person to discover it. The illusion I had meticulously constructed almost shattered into a million irreversible pieces exactly 42 days before the weddings. Maintaining a multi-million-dollar secret is akin to walking a tightrope without a safety net. You can control the venue, secure the non-disclosure agreements, and encrypt the invitations, but human error remains the ultimate vulnerability. I learned this lesson on a Tuesday afternoon when my mother decided to drop by my house completely unannounced. Catherine rarely visited my home. She considered my modest suburban neighborhood to be a depressing reminder of my lack of ambition. When the doorbell chimed, I was sitting at the dining room table reviewing final budget approvals for the Whispering Pines Reserve. Piles of architectural renderings, floral quotes, and high-end catering invoices covered the reclaimed wood surface. I glanced at the security camera monitor on my desk. Catherine was standing on my front porch, holding a cardboard box overflowing with discarded wilted floral centerpieces. Lexi had apparently changed her mind about the color palette for her reception tables again, and my mother was dropping off the rejects, perhaps, assuming I could use them to decorate my imaginary picnic pavilion. Panic surged through my veins, hot and immediate. I scrambled out of my chair, sweeping the architectural renderings and floral quotes into a messy pile and shoving them into a nearby credenza. I managed to conceal the bulk of the evidence, but in my frantic rush, a single piece of paper fluttered out of the stack and landed face up near the fruit bowl. I unlocked the front door, forcing my heart rate to steady and pasting a welcoming smile onto my face. "Hello, Mom," I greeted, stepping aside to let her in. "What a surprise." Catherine breezed past me, dumping the cardboard box of wilted hydrangeas onto the kitchen island. Lexi decided the blue tones clash with her bridesmaids' dresses. She is going with a blush and ivory aesthetic now. I figured you might want these. They are a bit droopy, but you can probably salvage a few stems for your little gathering. "Thank you," I replied, my voice remarkably calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. I will see what I can do with them. Catherine did not immediately retreat toward the door. Instead, she began wandering through the open-concept living space, her critical gaze assessing my furniture. She paused at the dining room table. Her hand reached out, her manicured fingers closing around the single piece of paper I had missed during my frantic cleanup. It was an itemized catering invoice. The header displayed the logo of a Michelin-starred culinary team based in Seattle. The line items clearly listed $50,000 for imported beluga caviar, 5 Japanese Wagyu beef, and white truffles. The total sum at the bottom of the page was more than my parents earned in 3 years. Catherine's brow furrowed, the skin between her eyes pinching together in profound confusion. She picked up the invoice, holding it closer to the natural light streaming through the window. "What on earth is this, Hazel?" she asked, the pitch of her voice rising in sharp disbelief. My heart stopped beating. The silence in the room stretched heavy and dangerous. If she realized the truth now, if she comprehended that I was financing an event that dwarfed Lexi's borrowed spectacle, the entire strategic framework of my revenge would disintegrate. She would immediately demand I pay off William's mounting debt, and the poetic justice of the climax would evaporate instantly. I forced a dry, self-deprecating laugh, moving toward the table with casual, unhurried steps. I snatched the invoice from her hand, rolling my eyes in an exaggerated display of annoyance. "Oh, that!" I sighed, tossing the paper onto a pile of junk mail. "Ethan's former employer is undergoing a massive corporate audit. He agreed to help them sort through some of their archived event files as a freelance favor. Can you believe what some of these tech companies spend on a single executive dinner? It is absolutely insane." Catherine stared at the paper for another long second. The tension in the air was palpable. I could see the gears turning in her mind, weighing the astronomical figures against the narrative she had constructed about my life. Then she scoffed. The tension broke, replaced by her familiar condescending arrogance. She easily bought the lie. In her reality, Ethan was a low-level programmer doing tedious administrative grunt work to earn a few extra dollars. The idea that we were actually purchasing beluga caviar was simply too absurd for her to entertain. "Well," she muttered, adjusting the strap of her designer handbag, "if he is doing freelance audit work, he should charge them double. You two need the money." I nodded enthusiastically, silently thanking the universe for her impenetrable vanity. "Yes, we certainly do. Was there anything else you needed, Mom?" Catherine turned to face me, her posture stiffening. The brief moment of vulnerability passed, and she assumed her role as the commanding matriarch. She did not drive all the way to my house just to drop off dead flowers. She had an agenda. "Actually, yes," she stated, crossing her arms over her chest. "Lexi and I need to discuss your wedding date." I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms to mirror her stance. "What about my date?" "Your date is 3 weeks after Lexi's," Catherine pointed out, her tone laced with irritation. "Lexi feels that having your gathering so close to her reception is stealing her thunder. She will still be in her honeymoon phase, adjusting to life as Mrs. Prescott. People will be totally burnt out on wedding events. She needs you to delay yours." I stared at her, genuinely struggling to comprehend the depth of their narcissism. Lexi had stolen my $85,000 trust fund. She had stolen my dream venue. She had demanded my vintage heirloom pearls. Now she was demanding I alter my own life schedule because my hypothetical park barbecue threatened to overshadow her grand entrance into high society. "I am not delaying my date, Mom," I replied, my voice a flat, uncompromising surface. "Everything is already planned." Catherine's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin white line. "Hazel, you are being incredibly unreasonable. Your little potluck can happen at any time. Lexi's event is a major societal milestone. Do not be selfish. I am not changing the date, I repeated, maintaining eye contact. Catherine uncrossed her arms, stepping closer to me. She was preparing to deliver her ultimate threat, the weapon she believed would force my total compliance. If you do not reschedule your gathering, she declared, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper, your father and I will not attend. We will not support a daughter who actively tries to upstage her sister. You can sit in that park all by yourself. Delay the date or we are done. It was the ultimate devastating ultimatum. She was threatening to boycott her eldest daughter's wedding to satisfy the fragile ego of the golden child. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to beg for her presence to compromise my own boundaries to keep the family intact. The projection was staggering. She accused me of trying to upstage Lexi, completely blind to the reality that my actual event would make Lexi's wedding look like a backyard birthday party. The little girl inside me, the child who had spent decades yearning for her mother's approval, wanted to yield. But the woman I had become the architect of a multi-million-dollar empire stepped forward to take control. I looked at the woman who had terrorized my self-esteem for nearly 30 years. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or shed a tear. I looked her dead in the eye, my expression perfectly serene. I understand completely, I said softly. I will not change my date, but I accept that you and Dad will not be there. Catherine stared at me, shock rippling across her features. She expected a fight. She received quiet, absolute acceptance. She stormed out of my house, slamming the front door behind her, victorious in her mind. She truly believed she had put the pathetic, jealous scapegoat in her place. She had no idea she had just voluntarily opted out of my life forever. The bridge was officially burned. There would be no reserved seats in the front row. There would be no father-daughter dance. With my biological family officially removed from the guest list, it was time to attend Lexi's borrowed spectacle and watch the cracks in their facade begin to show. The kitchen felt suffocatingly small. Catherine stood near the granite island, her chin tilted upward, her posture rigid with practiced authority. She had just delivered her ultimate threat, dropping it into the quiet space of my home like a live grenade. Delay my wedding date, clear the calendar for a year so Lexi could bask in an uninterrupted spotlight or face the total boycott of my parents. The sheer magnitude of her projection hung in the air, thick and oppressive. She was accusing me of trying to upstage my sister, completely blind to the reality that my actual event would make Lexi's wedding look like a poorly funded rehearsal dinner. I looked at the woman standing across from me. For a fraction of a second, the phantom ache of my childhood flared to life. The little girl who had spent 3 decades painting perfect art projects, earning flawless grades, and shrinking herself into the corners of our household, desperately wanted to yield. That wounded inner child wanted to cry, to beg for a compromise, to do whatever it took to keep her mother from walking out the door. But that child no longer ran my life. The woman I had become the architect of an 8-figure real estate empire stepped forward to take the reins. I did not raise my voice. I did not cross my arms or display any defensive posture. I simply maintained eye contact, letting a serene, unbothered calm settle over my features. I understand completely, I said, my voice a flat, uncompromising surface. I will not change my date, but I accept that you and Dad will not be there. The words landed between us, heavy and final. Catherine's eyes widened for a split second. The skin around her mouth tightened. She had expected a fight. She had anticipated tears, frantic negotiations, or an angry outburst she could later recount to her friends as proof of my instability. My quiet, absolute acceptance derailed her entire script. She shifted her weight, gripping the leather handle of her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to issue another threat, but found nothing left in her arsenal. She had played her highest card, and I had simply folded the game. With a sharp, indignant huff, she spun on her heel. Her heels clicked a frantic, angry rhythm against my hardwood floors. She did not look back. She yanked the front door open and stepped out into the crisp Montana afternoon. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind her, the force of the impact rattling the glass panes in the sidelights. I stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the engine of her luxury sports utility vehicle roar to life and fade down the street. The silence that followed was profound. It was not the heavy, sorrowful silence of a funeral. It was the clear, ringing stillness that follows the demolition of a condemned building. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Ethan walked into the living space, his expression carefully guarded. He had heard the entire exchange from his home office. He walked over to the kitchen island, bypassing the box of wilted flowers my mother had discarded, and stopped right in front of me. He reached out, resting his warm hands on my shoulders.
She is gone,
he stated softly, a statement of fact rather than a question. Yes, I replied, leaning into his touch. She opted out. They both did. Ethan pulled me into a deep, grounding embrace. I rested my cheek against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. In that moment, the finality of the situation washed over me. The bridge connecting me to my biological family was officially burned to ash. By refusing to attend my decoy gathering, they had formally surrendered their right to participate in my actual life. I allowed myself 10 minutes to mourn the traditional wedding milestones I would never experience. There would be no reserved seats in the front row for the people who raised me. There would be no tearful mother zipping up my custom bridal gown in the bridal suite. There would be no father-daughter dance under the glass roof of the Whispering Pines Conservatory. William would never take my hand and walk me down the aisle toward the man I loved. But as the 10 minutes expired, the sorrow evaporated, replaced by a fierce, protective gratitude. The seats in the front row would not sit empty. They would be filled by David and Clara people who loved me without conditions. The space beside me would not be occupied by a man drowning in vanity and debt. It would be my own space, walked on my own terms. I was free. The weeks leading up to Lexi's wedding accelerated into a chaotic blur. While I finalized the luxury accommodations for my 300 high-net-worth guests, my parents were plunging headfirst into a financial abyss. Because I owned the parent company operating the Glacier Peaks Lodge, my venue manager Sarah kept me discreetly informed of the escalating disaster. The updates Sarah provided painted a grim picture of William's collapsing facade. 2 weeks before the Prescott event, his primary credit card was declined while attempting to finalize the premium liquor invoice. He had to wire funds from a high-interest personal loan account just to keep the vendors from walking off the property. Catherine was reportedly pacing the lodge lobby during walkthroughs, snapping at the staff, her nerves frayed to the breaking point by the mounting debt. They were literally bleeding themselves dry to impress a family of venture capitalists, entirely oblivious to the fact that their eldest daughter was managing an 8-figure ledger just a few miles away. The tension was building toward a spectacular rupture, and I had a front-row seat to the impending collision. The morning of Lexi's wedding dawned crisp and clear, the Montana sky a brilliant, uninterrupted blue. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, assessing my reflection. I had deliberately chosen an outfit designed to blend into the background. I wore a plain, unembellished navy blue dress, modest heels, and minimal makeup. I left Clara's vintage pearls safely locked in my jewelry box, opting for a simple silver chain. Ethan stood beside me, adjusting the cuffs of a standard off-the-rack gray suit. We looked exactly like the unremarkable, financially struggling couple Catherine had described to the extended family. We climbed into my older sedan and began the drive toward the Glacier Peaks Lodge. The journey felt surreal. I was traveling to a venue I secretly owned to watch my sister marry into a family that despised mediocrity, funded by parents who were secretly broke. We pulled through the grand stone gates of the estate. Luxury vehicles, imported sports cars, and chauffeured sedans lined the valet loop. Women in designer gowns and men in bespoke tuxedos mingled on the manicured lawns, sipping champagne from crystal flutes. The air hummed with the quiet, aggressive energy of old money and high-stakes networking. The scent of imported white orchids hung heavy in the mountain breeze, a fragrant reminder of my stolen trust fund. Ethan parked our modest car in the overflow lot far away from the flashing cameras in the valet stand. We walked hand in hand up the gravel path toward the towering stone manor. As we approached the main terrace, I spotted my father standing near the entrance. His tuxedo fit perfectly, but his face told a different story. His skin was pale, a thin sheen of nervous perspiration coating his forehead, despite the cool alpine temperature. He was clutching a glass of bourbon like a life raft, his eyes darting frantically across the crowd. He was searching for the Prescott family patriarch, desperate to project an image of effortless wealth. But as I watched William force a rigid smile and step forward to greet the arriving venture capitalists, I noticed something my father had missed. Mr. Prescott was not looking at the imported floral arches or the expensive champagne tower. His sharp, calculating gaze was sweeping the property, assessing the sheer cost of the spectacle, and his expression was not one of admiration. It was one of deep, growing suspicion. The cracks in my family's facade were already beginning to show, and the main event had not even started. We slipped into the back row of the ceremony space, just as the string quartet began dragging their bows across the cellos. The wooden folding chairs were adorned with cascading white orchids, the exact expensive blooms my stolen trust fund had purchased. Ethan held my hand, his thumb tracing slow, comforting circles against my knuckles. We wore our unassuming attire, sitting quietly among a sea of designer suits and imported fabrics. Up at the altar, William stood beside Lexi, waiting to give her away. My father looked physically ill. The tailored tuxedo jacket pulled tight across his rigid shoulders, and his complexion mirrored the pale linen table runners lining the aisle. A thin layer of perspiration coated his forehead, catching the afternoon sunlight. He was a man suffocating under a crushing mountain of high-interest loans, putting on a brave, strained face for the wealthy venture capitalists seated in the front rows. He was trading his financial future for a few hours of country club applause. Lexi walked down the aisle wearing the custom gown she had paraded around the bridal boutiques, topped with the rented diamond headpiece that sparked the bitter war over my vintage pearls. She looked radiant to the untrained eye, but her smiles were sharp and calculated, directed at the hired photographers rather than her awaiting groom. She recited her standard vows, her voice echoing through the manicured garden, but the words felt hollow. It was a theatrical performance rather than a genuine promise of partnership. Following the ceremony, the guests transitioned into the grand ballroom of the Glacier Peaks Lodge, my ballroom. As the silent owner of the property, I noted the flawless execution of the amber lighting and the impeccable service of my staff gliding across the polished hardwood floors. Lexi, however, found faults hidden in every corner. I watched from a shadowed alcove near a towering floral arrangement as she aggressively cornered a young waiter. Her voice was a harsh, venomous hiss, berating him over the precise temperature of the past appetizers. The Prescotts seated at the elevated head tables exchanged tight, uncomfortable glances. Families possessing generational wealth valued discretion, grace, and treating service staff with polite indifference. Lexi was demonstrating none of those traits. She was trying too hard, revealing the exact desperate insecurity she hoped to conceal. She was a tourist in their world, and her abrasive behavior was highlighting her lack of belonging. Ethan and I wandered toward the mahogany bar, tucked into a quiet corner of the room. We ordered sparkling water with lime, standing peacefully in our unbranded clothing, while the elite guests networked and boasted around us. A few feet away stood Mr. Prescott, the patriarch of the venture capital firm. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch, engaged in a low, serious conversation with two other older men wearing bespoke charcoal suits. I leaned back against the polished wood paneling, inadvertently catching fragments of their intense discussion over the hum of the jazz band. Mr. Prescott was not talking about the beautiful venue or his new daughter-in-law. He was complaining about a frustrating business acquisition. The predictive algorithms they are building are light years ahead of the current market, Prescott stated, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal. I have my executive assistants calling his office twice a week. We offered a very generous valuation, an opening bid that would make most developers weep, and the kid will not even take a preliminary meeting. He brushed off our managing director yesterday. One of the associates frowned. Maneta. One of the associates, taking a sip of his own drink. What is the name of the founder again? Prescott sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose in clear frustration. Delaney. Ethan Delaney. The company operates stealthily, but if we do not secure an equity stake by the fourth quarter, we are going to lose our competitive edge in the sector. The man is a ghost. He refuses to attend the usual industry summits. I froze, my sparkling water halting halfway to my lips. Ethan Delaney was standing less than 3 feet away from him, wearing an off-the-rack gray suit, quietly sipping generic club soda. I glanced sideways at my fiancé. Ethan stared straight ahead, his expression carefully blank, but the corner of his mouth twitched in a suppressed, knowing smile. He reached out and gave my waist a gentle squeeze. Mr. Prescott was hemorrhaging money on a lavish wedding to impress the local high society, entirely unaware that the elusive tech genius he was desperate to court was standing right next to him. My family had cast Ethan aside as a destitute, struggling failure, forcing him into the back row. The sheer, concentrated irony of the moment tasted sweeter than the expensive champagne flowing through the ballroom. Before I could fully savor the revelation, the catering staff began distributing slices of the towering 6-tier wedding cake. I remained near the perimeter of the dance floor, content to observe the spectacle from the shadows. Catherine spotted me from across the room. She navigated through the crowd of wealthy guests, her emerald silk gown swishing heavily around her ankles. She held a small porcelain plate carrying a single piece of cake, her chin lifted in a triumphant, arrogant angle. She stopped in front of me, her eyes sweeping over my plain navy dress with undisguised pity. She leaned in close, ensuring the surrounding guests could not overhear her venom. "Well, Hazel," she murmured, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "What do you think it is breathtaking, is it not?" I maintained a serene, unbroken gaze, refusing to let her see any trace of the fire burning behind my eyes. "The venue is beautiful, Mom. The staff seems to be doing an excellent job keeping everything organized." Catherine let out a soft, patronizing sigh. "This is what a real wedding looks like. I am sorry your little barbecue will not compare to this standard, but we all have our roles in life. Some people are meant to shine in the spotlight, and some people are meant to watch from the sidelines." She patted my arm, a physical manifestation of her inflated ego. "Try to enjoy the cake. It is a French vanilla bean flown in from a specialty bakery. Very expensive. Make sure you get a slice before you leave." I did not slap her hand away. I did not raise my voice, defend my upcoming event, or mention the staggering truth about the venue she was currently praising. I simply smiled, lifting my glass of water in a mock toast. "You are right, Mom," I replied smoothly, my voice a calm, unbothered river. "We all have our roles. Enjoy tonight." Catherine smirked, turning away to rejoin the elite circle she had paid so dearly to enter. She floated back toward the head table, blissfully ignorant of the trap waiting for her. I set my untouched glass on a passing waiter's silver tray. I caught Ethan's eye across the room and nodded toward the exit doors. We slipped out the side entrance, leaving the blaring music, the forced laughter, and the suffocating vanity behind us. The cool Montana night air washed over us as we walked the gravel path back to our older sedan in the overflow parking lot. I paused by the passenger door, looking back at the glowing windows of the stone manor. My manor. My sister was inside, screaming at my employees, wearing a rented tiara financed by my stolen trust fund. My father was inside, drinking away the terror of his impending bankruptcy. My mother was inside, gloating over a temporary hollow illusion. I opened the car door, sliding into the leather seat. The decoy phase of my strategy had successfully concluded. They had played their parts perfectly, ignoring the quiet girl in the background while they danced on the edge of a jagged cliff. My quiet era was officially over. Tomorrow morning, the heavy gold-embossed boxes containing the real invitations would be handed over to the private courier service. It was time to detonate their fragile social hierarchy from the inside. And the Prescott family was going to provide the perfect match. The Monday morning following the spectacle at Glacier Peaks Lodge brought a harsh reality to my parents' Kalispell ranch. The rented floral arrangements were rotting in dumpsters. The imported champagne was gone. The only things remaining were the crippling credit card statements arriving in William's email inbox. He sat at his kitchen table, nursing a dull headache, fielding calls from relentless debt collectors who wanted their final payments. Lexi and her new husband had departed for a brief coastal honeymoon, leaving my parents to navigate the financial ruin they had constructed. While they suffocated under the weight of their vanity, a fleet of private uniformed couriers dispersed across the country. They did not carry cheap, glossy pamphlets or generic digital links. They carried heavy velvet-lined boxes sealed with custom wax insignias. Inside each box rested a thick square of imported cotton paper inscribed with hand-calligraphed gold ink. These were the real invitations to the actual event. I had spent the last 4 years designing and developing the Whispering Pines Reserve. It was a 5,000-acre luxury estate, hidden deep within the rugged Montana wilderness, far away from public roads and prying eyes. I purchased the land discreetly, navigating complex environmental surveys and zoning laws to build an architectural marvel into the side of a granite mountain. The centerpiece of the property was a towering glass conservatory that offered an uninterrupted, breathtaking view of the Alpine Valley. It was an ultra-exclusive sanctuary for individuals who valued privacy above all else. To match the caliber of the venue, Ethan and I sourced the finest vendors in the world. We flew in a renowned Michelin-starred chef from New York to curate a 7-course tasting menu. We hired a world-class 15-piece symphony orchestra to provide the evening soundtrack. The budget for the single weekend eclipsed everything my family had spent on Lexi's wedding, yet we funded every single cent without incurring $1 of debt. The guest list was a closely guarded secret. We invited 300 of our most trusted colleagues, loyal friends, and strategic business partners. Silicon Valley innovators, commercial real estate magnates, and private equity directors received the heavy boxes. They knew the protocol. The location was undisclosed until the final hour, enforcing a strict perimeter to guarantee their peace of mind. but there was one specific invitation that served a dual purpose. It was not just an entry pass to a luxury gathering. It was a tactical strike designed to detonate the false narrative Catherine had so carefully spun. That particular wax-sealed box arrived via specialized delivery at a sleek high-rise executive office building in downtown Seattle. It was placed on the polished mahogany desk of Charles Prescott, the formidable venture capitalist patriarch and Lexi's new father-in-law. Charles sat in his leather chair, a cup of dark roast coffee steaming near his elbow. He was a man who appreciated rare, refined objects. The weight and craftsmanship of the courier box caught his attention. He sliced the wax seal with a silver letter opener and lifted the lid. He removed the thick cotton cardstock, his eyes scanning the elegant gold calligraphy. He read the first name, Ethan Delaney. Charles froze. The coffee cup remained untouched. Ethan Delaney was the elusive tech genius he had been desperately hunting for the past 6 months. He was the founder of the revolutionary software startup that Prescott Ventures needed to acquire to stay relevant. He was the man Charles had complained about just 48 hours prior while standing at the mahogany bar during Lexi's wedding reception. Charles read the second name, Hazel Sanchez. A profound, unsettling quiet filled the executive suite. Charles lowered the invitation to the surface of his desk, his sharp mind connecting the jagged pieces of the puzzle. He remembered the quiet, unassuming couple standing near the dance floor in plain, unbranded clothing. He remembered Lexi's dismissive tone whenever she spoke about her older sister. He remembered Catherine's loud, boastful complaints about Hazel being a destitute, embarrassing failure who was planning a cheap potluck in a municipal park. The realization hit the venture capitalist with the force of a freight train. Catherine and Lexi had brazenly, repeatedly lied to his face. They had painted Hazel as a broke, jealous relative to elevate their own social standing. They portrayed themselves as the wealthy, sophisticated elite. In reality, they were superficial charlatans drowning in debt, while the supposed failure of the family was quietly preparing to marry the most powerful tech founder in the region. Hazel was an equal partner in an 8-figure union hosting a highly secure ultra-luxury summit that made the Prescott wedding look like a frantic amateur production. Charles Prescott was a man who despised deception. He had built his fortune by reading people, identifying their true value, and discarding liabilities. He realized instantly that his son had married into a family of toxic, status-obsessed liars. The Sanchez matriarch had tried to play him for a fool. He did not throw the invitation away. He reached for his keyboard, accessed the encrypted digital portal listed at the bottom of the card, and formally registered his attendance. He submitted a yes for himself and his wife. That evening, Charles returned to his sprawling estate and shared the revelation with Mrs. Prescott. The dynamic within their household shifted overnight. When Lexi returned from her honeymoon a few days later, expecting to be embraced as the new golden child of the Prescott dynasty, she encountered a wall of polite, freezing indifference. Her new in-laws no longer viewed her as a sophisticated prize. They viewed her as a fraudulent liability. They stopped returning Catherine's enthusiastic phone calls. They declined invitations to Sunday brunches. The warm, welcoming embrace of high society suddenly turned into a locked steel door. Lexi and Catherine were deeply confused by the sudden cold shoulder, but they were too arrogant to look inward for the cause. They assumed the Prescotts were merely busy with corporate affairs. They continued to live in their bubble of delusion, eagerly anticipating the day they could boycott my little park barbecue and finalize my isolation. They had no idea that the very people they worshipped were currently selecting bespoke formal wear to attend my secret event. The trap was now fully armed. The guests were confirmed. The Michelin chef was prepping the imported truffles, and the orchestra was tuning their instruments inside the glass conservatory. I sat in my home office watching the final RSVPs lock into the encrypted database. I traced my finger over the gold lettering of an extra invitation I had kept for my own records. The quiet era of my life was done. My family had spent 3 decades treating me like dirt to build their fragile castle. Now all it needed was a single well-placed spark on the morning of my wedding to burn their illusion to the ground. The dawn broke over the jagged peaks of the Montana wilderness, casting long morning shadows across the dense valley floor. Inside the master suite of the Whispering Pines estate, serenity reigned. It was not the tense, anxious quiet that precedes a storm, but the profound tranquility of a secure fortress. I sat in a plush armchair near the expansive windows, holding a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. The scent of damp pine needles and rich espresso mingled in the cool alpine air. Down the hallway, there were no screaming brides demanding perfection. There were no panicked fathers hiding in corners negotiating with caterers over declined credit cards. The toxic friction that defined my sister's wedding day was entirely absent from my own. I had purchased my peace, and the investment was yielding beautiful returns. Clara stood behind me, her gentle hands working the intricate row of silk-covered buttons lining the back of my custom gown. The French organza felt weightless against my skin, a stark contrast to the heavy synthetic fabrics I had tried on during that decoy fitting months ago. Clara smoothed the ethereal material over my shoulders, her touch steady and reassuring. I reached up my fingers, brushing the vintage pearl necklace resting against my collarbone. Our eyes met in the vanity mirror. Clara offered a soft, knowing smile, understanding the unspoken gravity of the morning. She was providing the maternal warmth I had spent 3 decades craving, and her presence healed a wound my biological mother had left wide open. Below the master's suite, the venue hummed with precise orchestrated movement. The glass-walled conservatory built directly into the side of the mountain sparkled under the midday sun. Delivery trucks from specialized florists had arrived before sunrise carrying thousands of imported Dutch blooms. A seasoned team of designers was currently weaving white roses and cascading greenery into towering archways. In the commercial kitchen, the Michelin-starred culinary team prepped black truffles and delicate pastries. Every detail operated flawlessly, funded by clean capital and executed by professionals who respected their employer. At 1:30 in the afternoon, my maid of honor Jessica walked into the suite holding my mobile device. Jessica was a sharp, fiercely loyal commercial real estate attorney who had helped me close the Glacier Peaks acquisition. She knew every dark detail of my family history, and she was thoroughly enjoying her role as the guardian of my communication channels. The guests are mingling in the welcome lounge, Jessica reported, setting the phone face down on the marble vanity. The venture capital crowd is already networking near the Champagne Tower. Charles Prescott arrived 10 minutes ago. He looks exceptionally comfortable. I nodded, feeling a quiet thrill course through my veins. The presence of my sister's new father-in-law was the ultimate validation of my strategy. "Cousin Rachel is also here," Jessica added, a sly grin forming on her lips. "She brought the gift you requested." Rachel was the only member of the Sanchez bloodline I had entrusted with a genuine invitation. She was a corporate auditor based in Denver, a pragmatic woman who had always seen through Catherine's superficial lies. Rachel possessed a sharp intellect and a low tolerance for country club drama. When Catherine had initiated her vicious smear campaign calling the extended family to warn them about my supposed poverty, Rachel had quietly contacted me. She recognized the scent of my mother's fabrication immediately. I had sworn Rachel to secrecy, explaining the corporate embargo and the decoy event. She had played her part perfectly, RSVPing no to the imaginary park gathering while secretly booking a first-class flight to Montana. The strategy we had coordinated was simple, but devastating. For the past 6 weeks, I had strictly enforced a non-disclosure agreement among my 300 guests. No photographs, no location tags, no digital breadcrumbs. I needed the illusion of my failure to remain intact until the exact moment it would cause the most psychological damage. 2:00 in the afternoon marked the precise hour my family believed I was standing under a rusted municipal park pavilion, serving hot dogs on paper plates to a handful of pitying friends. At 2:00, the digital embargo lifted. Rachel stood near the entrance of the glass conservatory holding her smartphone. I had given her explicit permission to document the venue. She opened her social media application, activated the video recording feature, and slowly panned the camera across the breathtaking room. The lens captured the soaring glass ceilings reflecting the rugged mountain peaks. It recorded the 15-piece symphony orchestra tuning their polished instruments on a raised stage. It swept over the towering floral installations and the waitstaff circulating with silver trays of top-tier champagne. It was a 15-second clip of undeniable billionaire-tier luxury. She added a brief, simple caption to the footage. "Celebrating Hazel and Ethan at the most spectacular private estate in Montana." Rachel pressed upload. The digital shockwave rippled out into the atmosphere, silent but lethal. 100 miles away inside the Kalispell ranch house, my sister was lounging on a living room sofa. Lexi was nursing a stubborn hangover from a recent socialite dinner, scrolling aimlessly through her digital feed. My parents were likely nearby, enjoying a quiet Saturday, feeling smug and superior, picturing me shivering in a public park. I sat at my vanity, watching my phone out of the corner of my eye. For 5 minutes, the screen remained dark. Then the first notification illuminated the glass. It was a text message from a secondary cousin who had chosen Lexi's side during the smear campaign. The message simply read, "Is this a joke?" 10 seconds later, another notification appeared. Then a third. The trickle rapidly transformed into a raging flood. The group chat containing the extended Sanchez family erupted into chaos. Jessica picked up the device, her eyes scanning the rapid-fire text bubbles scrolling across the screen. "They saw it," Jessica announced, her voice tinged with dark amusement. "Rachel just received 6 direct messages asking where she is." "Read them," I instructed, turning my chair to face her. Jessica cleared her throat, scrolling back to the top of the frenzy. Lexi sent the first group text. She typed, "Rachel, what is that video? Where are you? Whose wedding is that?" Before Rachel could even type a response, Aunt Vivian chimed in. Vivian, the woman who had offered to pay my rent based on my mother's lies, wrote, "Catherine, you told us Hazel was destitute. You said she was at the Whitefish Municipal Park. That video looks like a celebrity summit. Explain this right now." The cognitive dissonance striking my family must have been paralyzing. The visual evidence directly contradicted the reality they had stubbornly built their egos upon. Lexi was watching a symphony orchestra perform at her sister's wedding, an event that mathematically eclipsed her own borrowed spectacle by millions of dollars. The architecture, the flowers, the sheer scale of the Whispering Pines Reserve shattered the illusion of my poverty in 15 seconds. Then the incoming calls began. The phone vibrated violently in Jessica's hand. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. Jessica let it ring until it rolled over to voicemail. The device immediately lit up again. It was Lexi then, William, then Catherine again. Within 10 minutes, the screen logged 42 missed calls. The panic radiating through the cellular towers was palpable. Catherine and Lexi realized the horrifying truth with staggering clarity. They had not just skipped a pathetic potluck. They had voluntarily, arrogantly excluded themselves from the most exclusive social event of the decade. The very elite circles they had spent decades trying to impress were currently sitting in my audience, sipping vintage champagne while the Sanchez matriarch was trapped in a heavily mortgaged ranch house. They had dug their own social grave, and my cousin had just pushed them into it. Jessica tapped the screen, accessing the voicemail inbox. Catherine had left a frantic, breathless audio message. Jessica pressed play, amplifying the sound through the quiet suite. "Hazel, pick up the phone right now." My mother's voice trembled, vibrating with a toxic mixture of shock, indignation, and desperate entitlement. "What is going on? Where are you holding this event? Rachel just posted a video of a glass building. Why did you lie to us? You send us the gate code to this property immediately. We are your family. We are coming to support you. Do not do this to us." The sheer audacity of her demand echoed in the room. She was not calling to apologize for her behavior. She was not calling to express regret for boycotting my milestone. She was demanding the gate code because she realized there was a room full of powerful people, and she was locked on the outside. The fear of missing out on a networking opportunity superseded any maternal instinct she might have possessed. Jessica deleted the voicemail with a quick swipe of her thumb. She looked up at me, raising a single questioning eyebrow. The trap had sprung flawlessly. The reality of my empire was out in the open, exposing their lies to the entire extended family and the Prescott dynasty. They were marooned in Kalispell, drowning in the consequences of their own arrogance. But entitlement is a dangerous, unpredictable emotion. A family accustomed to taking whatever they wanted would not simply sit on a couch and accept defeat. They believed they owned my successes. The 42 missed calls were just the beginning. The real question was not whether they were angry. The real question was how far their desperation would drive them. Would they accept the impenetrable boundary I had established, or would their bottomless vanity compel them to get into their vehicle and drive toward the iron gates of Whispering Pines? The 15-piece symphony orchestra concluded their warm-up, the melodic notes of tuning violins drifting upward toward the soaring glass panels of the conservatory. The afternoon sun bathed the room in golden light, illuminating the imported floral arches and the rows of elegant acrylic seating. 300 guests had settled into their places. Ethan stood at the altar waiting for me. I remained hidden in the elevated bridal suite, watching the final preparations unfold with a serene, profound sense of accomplishment. At 3:15, the atmosphere outside the perimeter of my sanctuary shifted abruptly. The primary security entrance for the Whispering Pines Reserve was located half a mile down a winding private asphalt road. Massive wrought iron gates flanked by heavy stone pillars and surveillance cameras blocked any unauthorized access. Marcus, my head of security, was stationed at the checkpoint alongside 2 other trained professionals. Marcus was a seasoned former Navy SEAL, a man whose physical presence alone deterred trouble. He was meticulously briefed on the guest list and the specific individuals who were strictly prohibited from entering. A heavy black luxury sports utility vehicle crested the final hill of the access road. Traveling well above the posted speed limit, the driver slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching harshly against the pavement, skidding to a halt mere inches from the imposing iron barrier. It was my father's vehicle. The passenger side doors swung open with aggressive force before the engine had even idled down. Catherine and Lexi stumbled out onto the asphalt. They had clearly thrown on the most formal attire they could find in a frantic, panicked rush. Catherine wore her emerald silk gown, the hem dragging haphazardly against the gravel. Lexi wore a shimmering cocktail dress, her hair hastily pinned up. William climbed out of the driver's seat, his face flushed a deep mottled red, his tie completely askew. They marched toward the security booth, moving with the aggressive, unearned authority of people who believed their mere presence commanded obedience. Marcus stepped out of his station holding a digital tablet. His posture was relaxed, yet undeniably imposing. He placed himself directly in the center of the driveway, a human barricade standing between my family and their desperate need to infiltrate my life. "I am the mother of the bride," Catherine shrieked, pointing a manicured finger toward the iron bars. "Open these gates immediately! This is a family emergency. We are supposed to be inside." Marcus did not flinch. His expression remained entirely neutral, his training allowing him to absorb her hysteria without reacting. He tapped the screen of his tablet, pretending to consult a digital ledger he had already memorized.
"I am sorry, ma'am."
Marcus stated, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that cut through her frantic demands. "You are not on the approved guest list for this location. This is a private, secure event. I cannot grant you access." Lexi pushed past her mother, her face contorted in a mask of furious entitlement. She grabbed the iron bars, rattling them futilely. "Do you not understand who we are?" she demanded, her voice shrill and echoing down the quiet valley. "That is my sister in there. She forgot to send us the access code. We belong in there. Let us in right now before I have you fired." "I do not work for your sister, miss," Marcus corrected her calmly. "I work for Sierra Peak Holdings, the corporate entity that owns this estate, and the explicit instructions from the owner are to deny entry to anyone not listed on this roster." William stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a desperate attempt to assert dominance. He tried the routine he used to intimidate local contractors and bank tellers. "Now listen here, son," he barked, jabbing his finger toward Marcus. "Do you know who I am? I am William Sanchez. I have half a mind to call the local authorities and report you for detaining us. Open the gate, or you will regret it." Marcus folded his hands behind his back. The corners of his mouth tightened ever so slightly. "I know exactly who you are, sir." However, the property owner stated very clearly that any individual attempting to enter the premises without a verifiable invitation is to be treated as a hostile trespasser. If you do not turn your vehicle around immediately, I will be the one contacting local law enforcement to have you removed. The threat of legal intervention momentarily stunned them. Catherine opened and closed her mouth like a beached fish, struggling to comprehend a world where her demands were not instantly met. They had spent their entire lives bullying their way into country clubs and exclusive circles, relying on the assumption that rules did not apply to them. Facing a man who could not be intimidated or bribed shattered their entire operational strategy. But the true devastation, the ultimate lethal blow to their social standing, did not come from Marcus. It arrived silently, gliding up the asphalt road behind their parked SUV. A sleek midnight blue chauffeured Maybach rolled to a smooth stop, forced to wait because my father's vehicle was blocking the entrance. The tinted passenger window slowly rolled down. Charles Prescott, the venture capital patriarch, and Lexi's new father-in-law leaned forward to observe the commotion. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored tuxedo accompanied by his wife. They had received their exclusive invitations. They had navigated the rigorous security protocols. Now they were sitting in their luxury vehicle watching their new extended family completely humiliate themselves. Catherine spun around, intending to yell at the driver of the car behind them to back up. She locked eyes with Charles Prescott. The color drained from my mother's face so rapidly, it was as if someone had pulled a physical plug. Her jaw dropped. Her hands, which had been wildly gesturing moments before, fell limply to her sides. Lexi turned around and let out a strangled, horrified gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. William staggered backward, visibly shrinking under the piercing, judgmental gaze of the billionaire he had nearly bankrupted himself to impress. Charles did not say a word. He did not offer a greeting or ask why they were standing outside. He simply stared at Catherine, his expression a mask of cold, unadulterated disgust. He watched the woman who had spent months boasting about her wealth and sophistication reduced to a screeching trespasser begging for entry at a gate. He watched the family of liars exposed under the harsh Montana sunlight. From my elevated position inside the master suite, I could see the entire exchange through the floor-to-ceiling glass panels. I watched my mother realize that her social execution was absolute. She had not only alienated her wildly successful eldest daughter, but she had also permanently destroyed her reputation with the only family she truly valued. She was trapped on the wrong side of the iron bars, drowning in a catastrophe entirely of her own making. I turned my back to the windows. The orchestra began playing the opening chords of my processional music. I walked out of the suite and descended the grand staircase. Ethan was waiting at the bottom, his eyes shining with profound admiration. I took his arm, feeling the solid, unwavering strength of the man who had supported me through the war. I did not look back at the gates. I stepped into the golden light of the conservatory and walked down the aisle toward my future, leaving the architects of my past locked in the darkness of their own choices. The glass conservatory captured the fading afternoon sunlight, casting a warm golden glow across the faces of 300 guests. As I walked down the aisle, the symphony orchestra played a soft, sweeping melody that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards beneath my feet. I did not focus on the sea of venture capitalists, real estate magnates, or tech innovators seated around us. My gaze remained locked on Ethan. He stood at the altar, his eyes bright with unshed tears, reflecting the sheer magnitude of what we had overcome to reach this exact moment in time. There was no suffocating tension, no frantic whispers about unpaid catering bills, and no desperate attempts to impress anyone. The air felt light, purified by the absence of toxicity and deception. When I finally reached him, Ethan took both of my hands in his. He leaned in close, his breath warm against my cheek, and whispered 3 simple words. "You built this." The ceremony flowed seamlessly into a flawless reception under the vast, star-filled Montana sky. The culinary team presented a 7-course tasting menu featuring imported truffles and aged wines that left the attendees in quiet awe. Laughter echoed across the manicured lawns. Clara and David sat at the head table with us, radiating genuine pride and maternal warmth. However, beneath the elegant surface of the celebration, a potent current of gossip was rapidly circulating among the attendees. High society operates on information, and the incident at the front security checkpoint provided the ultimate currency for the evening. Charles Prescott sat near a roaring stone fireplace, swirling a snifter of aged cognac in his right hand. He was a man who commanded attention without raising his voice, and throughout the night I watched various executives and socialites approach his seating area. Charles did not shout the details of my mother's humiliation, but he certainly did not keep the encounter a secret. He quietly recounted the scene of Catherine screaming at a security guard, her silk gown dragging in the gravel, begging for entry into an estate she had previously mocked. He detailed her frantic, undignified behavior for anyone who inquired about the commotion at the gates. In the elite circles my mother worshipped, reputation is a fragile, invaluable asset. By midnight, Catherine was officially exposed as a fraud who had alienated her successful eldest daughter to fund a shallow, debt-ridden charade. Her social execution was finalized before we even cut the wedding cake. The weekend concluded in a haze of joyful exhaustion. Ethan and I spent Sunday resting in the master suite, savoring the profound quiet of our victory. But as Monday morning arrived, the atmosphere shifted from romantic bliss to calculated corporate precision. I sat at my mahogany desk opening my laptop. The time for passive observation was over. The trap had sprung. The social damage was done, but the financial reckoning had yet to be delivered. The legal weapon I had kept loaded for 6 months was ready to fire. I initiated a secure video conference with my lead corporate attorney, a sharp, seasoned litigator named Harrison. Harrison had spent the previous week preparing the necessary documentation. We possessed the bank transfer records proving Catherine drained the $85,000 trust fund on a specific Tuesday morning. We had the itemized invoices from Glacier Peaks Lodge proving she utilized the capital for Lexi's vendor payments, which constituted a clear violation of the executive terms. She had operated under the false pretense that I would simply absorb the theft and remain silent to keep the peace. Harrison confirmed the process server was already en route to the Kalispell Ranch. The legal filing was not a polite request for reimbursement. It was a formal civil lawsuit for blatant trust fraud. My grandfather, a man of exceptional foresight, had engineered a specific penalty clause to punish greed. Because Catherine misappropriated the funds before my 30th birthday, she was legally bound to repay the stolen amount at 3 times the original value. The mathematics were cold, unforgiving, and absolute. $85,000 multiplied by 3 equaled $255,000. Catherine and William were already drowning in high-interest loans from Lexi's extravagant affair. Adding $250,000 legal judgment to their ledger would shatter their fragile financial foundation entirely. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, my phone began to vibrate across the surface of my desk. The process server had completed the delivery. The device buzzed with a relentless, frantic rhythm. I watched the screen illuminate, displaying my mother's name. I did not answer. The call rolled to voicemail. 10 seconds later, the phone lit up again. This time it was my father, then Lexi. The cycle repeated, an endless loop of panic broadcasting through the cellular towers. They had opened the legal envelope, read the staggering figure, and realized the true cost of their vanity. By noon, the notification counter on my screen displayed 114 missed calls. The voicemail inbox was at maximum capacity. I opened the application, staring at the long list of audio files waiting to be heard. I pressed play on the most recent message. Catherine's voice filled the quiet office, stripped of all its former arrogance and condescension. She was weeping, her words tumbling out in a hyperventilating rush. "Hazel, please pick up the phone. You cannot do this to us. We do not have $255,000. We will lose the house. We are your family. I am your mother. Please drop the lawsuit. We can talk about this. I am begging you." I paused the audio. I sat in my leather chair, looking out the window at the dense pine forests bordering my property. I felt no pity. I felt no urge to negotiate or offer a lifeline. For 29 years, they had demanded my silent compliance while they enriched themselves at my expense. They had stolen my money, hijacked my dream venue, and attempted to ruin my reputation among our relatives. They had dug an $85,000 hole, assuming I would gladly throw myself inside to provide a solid foundation for their golden child. I deleted the voicemail, clearing the entire inbox with a single swipe of my finger. I did not listen to the remaining 113 pleas for mercy. The walls were finally caving in on them, and I was content to let the structure collapse into dust. I closed my laptop, the satisfaction deep and permanent. Yet the legal strike was merely the catalyst. The impending bankruptcy would trigger a chain reaction leading to a final piece of poetic justice. They could never have anticipated one that would cement my victory in the very soil they used to stand upon. The turquoise water of the Indian Ocean offered a perfect, silent barrier against the chaos unfolding back in North America. Ethan and I spent 14 days resting on the sun-bleached timber decks of an overwater bungalow in the Maldives. We left our primary cellular devices powered down inside the suite safe. There were no frantic text messages to read. There were no legal updates to monitor. We experienced zero exposure to the frantic toxic energy of my biological relatives. We drank fresh coconut water, swam in the warm tropical currents, and let the residual tension of the past 3 decades dissolve into the outgoing tide. When our chartered flight finally touched down on the tarmac at Glacier Park International Airport 2 weeks later, the crisp Montana air welcomed us home. I felt renewed. I felt sharp and focused. I was ready to survey the landscape of the battlefield I had left behind. The fallout from my wedding day was swift and absolute. My lead corporate attorney provided a comprehensive briefing the morning I returned to my office. William and Catherine failed to produce the $255,000 judgment within the mandated legal time frame. They lacked the liquid capital. Their credit lines were exhausted by the imported orchids and designer fabrics from the Prescott wedding. Their emergency reserves simply did not exist. The legal reality of a civil fraud judgment provides very few escape routes in the judicial system. Creditors descended upon the Kalispell Ranch like hungry wolves sensing a wounded animal. William was forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection. The bank initiated immediate foreclosure proceedings on the sprawling estate that had served as the physical manifestation of their towering ego. The heavy stone chimneys and wraparound cedar porches were no longer a symbol of generational wealth. They became the property of the bank, slated for public auction on the steps of the county courthouse. I did not attend the foreclosure auction in person. Showing my face among the local real estate prospectors would draw unnecessary attention and risk my anonymity. Instead, I dispatched a junior acquisitions associate from Sierra Peak Holdings to stand in the brisk autumn wind and hold a numbered bidding paddle. My associate wore a generic gray suit and remained entirely silent until the final call for bids. The bidding pool was remarkably small. The property carried the heavy stigma of a distressed asset and required significant interior updates to fix my mother's outdated, ostentatious tastes. When the auctioneer slammed his wooden gavel against the podium, the deed transferred ownership for mere pennies on the dollar. The anonymous corporate buyer was Sierra Peak Holdings, LLC. I sat at my mahogany desk later that afternoon, reviewing the digital confirmation of the sale. I now held the legal deed to the very house where I spent my childhood shrinking into the shadows. I owned the formal dining room where they mocked my modest lifestyle. I owned the sunroom where they conspired to steal my grandfather's legacy. The poetic justice tasted sweeter than vintage wine. I had purchased the physical monument of their arrogance. I planned to bulldoze the entire structure to the ground to build sustainable, affordable housing for the local workforce. Erasing their vanity project from the map felt like the ultimate cleansing ritual. While William and Catherine packed their remaining belongings into cheap cardboard boxes, Lexi faced her own harsh reckoning. She returned from her brief coastal honeymoon, expecting to assume her role as the pampered crown jewel of the Prescott dynasty. She anticipated unlimited access to the family venture capital accounts, luxury vehicles, and exclusive country club memberships. However, Charles Prescott possessed a long memory and a profound distaste for superficial liars. The spectacle at the security gates of Whispering Pines had cemented his opinion of his new daughter-in-law. Charles executed a swift clinical financial quarantine. He froze his son out of the discretionary family trusts, citing concerns over poor character judgment and the severe liability of associating with the Sanchez family. Lexi found herself trapped in a marriage stripped of the glamorous financial perks she had sacrificed her morals to secure. Her new husband, realizing his inheritance was jeopardized by his wife's behavior, grew resentful and distant. Her new in-laws stopped inviting her to Sunday dinners or holiday galas. The elite social circle she had desperately clawed her way into viewed her as a toxic, embarrassing joke. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of freezing indifference. Catherine, desperate to salvage any remaining shred of her social standing, attempted to control the narrative within her local community. She attended her weekly book club meeting at a high-end bistro in downtown Kalispell. She sat at the head of the table sipping a dry white wine, weaving a tragic tale of victimhood. She told the affluent women of the town that I had cruelly ambushed them, orchestrating a malicious trap to publicly humiliate my loving parents. She played the role of the heartbroken mother dabbing her dry eyes with a linen napkin. She expected sympathy. She expected the local gossip network to rally behind her and ostracize me. Catherine did not account for the presence of my cousin Rachel. Rachel happened to be visiting a colleague at that exact bistro and overheard the theatrical performance. Rachel did not cause a scene. She did not yell across the dining room. She simply walked over to the book club table, pulled her mobile phone from her purse, and placed it face up on the crisp white tablecloth. The screen displayed the archived group text messages from the months leading up to the wedding. The affluent women leaned in to read the digital receipts. They read the exact words where Catherine called my upcoming wedding a depressing potluck. They read her explicit refusal to attend my ceremony because it would not benefit their social climbing agenda. They saw the undeniable proof of her shallowness and her cruelty. The women at the table fell silent. They looked at Catherine with unvarnished disgust. High society forgives many sins, but it rarely forgives being exposed as a cheap fraud. The book club members quietly requested their individual checks, gathered their designer coats, and walked out of the bistro without saying goodbye. They left my mother sitting alone at the table with her empty wine glass. The exile was total and unrelenting. My parents were humiliated, financially ruined, and stripped of the only currency they valued. The community turned their backs, leaving them to navigate their new reality in a cramped, rented apartment on the outskirts of town. The empire of lies was reduced to ash. I watched from the summit of my own genuine success, untouched by their fall. Yet the quiet peace of their absence left one lingering question hovering in the crisp mountain air. They had lost everything. But did they possess the emotional capacity to truly understand why 6 months drifted past the jagged Montana peaks, transforming the harsh winter snow into the vibrant green thaws of early spring? Inside the secure executive suite of Sierra Peak Holdings, the climate remained perfectly controlled. I sat at my mahogany desk reviewing the final architectural blueprints for a new affordable housing initiative. The project was slated for construction on the exact acreage where my parents' sprawling ranch house used to stand. The demolition crews had leveled the stone chimneys and the wraparound cedar porches weeks ago, clearing the land to build something that actually served the community. It was a productive morning. My mind was clear. My business was thriving. And the toxic static that used to define my daily existence was entirely silent. My executive assistant, a highly efficient woman named Claire, walked into my office carrying the daily correspondence. She set a stack of sorted corporate dossiers on the corner of my desk. Sitting on top of the neat pile was a single crumpled envelope. It stood out against the polished leather desk pad like an ugly stain. The paper was cheap thin and slightly smudged with dirt. Claire informed me that it had arrived via standard postal delivery, bypassing our usual digital screening protocols because it carried a handwritten personal address. I dismissed Claire with a grateful nod. I stared at the envelope. I recognized the sharp slanted handwriting immediately. It belonged to my father. For a fleeting moment, I observed my own physical reaction. A year ago, seeing William's handwriting would have triggered a massive spike of adrenaline, a rush of cold anxiety pooling in my stomach. I would have braced myself for a demand and insult, or a heavy guilt trip engineered to drain my resources. Today, my pulse remained steady. The monitor on my wrist displayed a calm, resting heart rate. The emotional venom they used to inject into my veins had completely lost its potency. I reached out, picked up a silver letter opener, and sliced through the thin paper flap. I unfolded the single sheet of lined notebook paper. The contrast between my father's former country club arrogance and the desperate state of his current reality was written plainly in the dark ink. William did not begin with a warm greeting or an inquiry about my health. He began with a frantic, disjointed explanation of his current financial misery. He wrote about the cramped apartment he and Catherine were renting on the industrial outskirts of town. He detailed the humiliating process of liquidating his remaining personal assets just to keep the electricity flowing. He complained that Lexi and her new husband were ignoring their calls, abandoning them in their time of extreme need. The irony of the golden child discarding her enablers the moment their bank accounts ran dry was profound, but I felt no urge to laugh. The second paragraph of the letter pivoted from self-pity to the true purpose of his correspondence. William was asking for a lifeline. He wrote that his remaining commercial logistics business was facing imminent collapse due to unpaid vendor invoices and a ruined local reputation. He suggested that we meet for a quiet cup of coffee to discuss a potential corporate bailout. He framed the request not as a plea for charity, but as a strategic investment opportunity for Sierra Peak Holdings. He actually used the phrase mutually beneficial. He claimed that the unfortunate events surrounding the wedding were simply painful misunderstandings born out of high stress and poor communication. He appealed to my sense of familial duty, insisting that blood is thicker than water and that it was time to put the past behind us. I read the letter a second time, scanning the hasty, cursive script for the one thing that might have justified a response. I searched for an apology. I looked for a single sentence acknowledging the $85,000 trust fund they had illegally drained. I looked for a shred of remorse for the 29 years of psychological torment, the endless comparisons to Lexi, and the deliberate attempt to boycott my wedding celebration. I searched for an admission of guilt regarding the smear campaign they launched to isolate me from my extended relatives. There was nothing. The page was entirely devoid of accountability. William was not apologizing for breaking my heart. He was apologizing because he had been caught, and he was only reaching out because his preferred source of funding had evaporated. He was asking the daughter he once told to keep it simple, to magically produce a complex financial rescue package. I did not feel the sudden burning rush of anger. I did not pick up my mobile device to call him and scream into the receiver. I did not feel the need to draft a lengthy multi-page response detailing every single way he had failed me as a parent. Explaining your pain to individuals who lack empathy is a useless expenditure of energy. They do not hear your words. They do not process your grief. They only look for the cracks in your armor so they can insert a new lever of manipulation. William was hoping my silence was masking a hidden reservoir of daughterly guilt. He assumed I would eventually break under the societal pressure of family loyalty. He was deeply mistaken. I opened the top drawer of my mahogany desk. I retrieved a piece of heavy cotton stationery. The paper was thick-textured and embossed with the gold insignia of my company. I selected a fountain pen, unscrewing the cap with slow, deliberate precision. I smoothed the blank stationery over the leather desk pad. I did not write a salutation. I did not address him as dad or father. I let the nib of the pen touch the paper, leaving a trail of dark, permanent ink. I wrote one single sentence. I kept it simple. Do not contact me again. I set the pen down. I folded the heavy cotton paper and slipped it into a matching gold-lined envelope. I wrote his return address on the front affixed adequate postage and placed it in the outgoing mail tray. The physical action felt like closing the final chapter of a very long, exhausting book. I opened my computer terminal and navigated to the building security protocols. I permanently added William and Catherine to the restricted access list for all commercial properties owned by my firm. I updated the legal injunction with my attorneys to block any future physical or digital correspondence from their current address. The perimeter was secure. The fortress was sealed. I leaned back in my chair, turning my gaze toward the expansive windows. The Montana wilderness stretched out before me, vast, untamed, and fiercely beautiful. For 3 decades, I had shrunk my personality, my ambitions, and my physical presence to make my biological family comfortable. I had accepted their emotional scraps, convincing myself that surviving their neglect was the same thing as being loved. I had allowed them to treat me like a disposable stepping stone, a convenient scapegoat utilized solely to fund and elevate their golden child. Society often preaches that family is an unbreakable bond. We are fed the narrative that blood relations demand endless forgiveness regardless of the damage inflicted upon the soul. We are conditioned to believe that walking away from our parents is the ultimate moral failure. The world expects the scapegoat to endlessly turn the other cheek to absorb the trauma and to keep smiling for the holiday photographs. But I had learned a different, much harder truth over the past year. Boundaries are not about punishing other people. Setting a boundary is not an act of vengeance or malice. Setting a boundary is the profound, necessary act of protecting your own peace. It is the realization that you are not required to set yourself on fire simply to keep someone else warm. My parents had desperately wanted a compliant, silent scapegoat. They wanted an invisible daughter who would quietly absorb their financial burdens and fade into the background while they basked in the country club spotlight. But their relentless greed and their staggering arrogance had backfired with spectacular precision. In their attempt to break my spirit and steal my legacy, they accidentally forged a queen who learned how to build her own castle. They pushed me into the dark, and I used that darkness to construct an empire they could never touch. I lost an $85,000 wedding fund on that quiet Tuesday morning. At the time, it felt like a devastating, insurmountable betrayal. But as I looked around my office, knowing Ethan was waiting for me at home, knowing that my life was finally my own, the mathematics of the situation shifted. The money was not stolen. It was the purchase price of my liberation. I paid $85,000 to rid myself of toxic abusers forever. I bought back my dignity. I bought back my future. I bought back my freedom, and it was the best investment I ever made. We grow up steeped in the mythology of the American dream, a dream that relies heavily on the bedrock of the traditional family structure. From our very first breaths, we are told that family is our ultimate safe harbor, that blood is an unbreakable bond, and that loyalty to one's parents is the highest virtue a person can possess. American culture constantly bombards us with images of the idyllic holiday gathering, the proud parents sitting in the front row of a graduation, and the unwavering safety net that catches us when we fall. But what happens when the harbor is the very thing trying to sink your ship? What happens when the safety net is actually a web designed to trap and exploit you? Hazel Sanchez's story forces us to look into a mirror that many of us would rather keep covered. It strips away the glossy veneer of country club memberships, luxury vehicles, and curated social media feeds to expose a raw, uncomfortable truth about parenting responsibility and the quiet devastation of conditional love. Through this story, our channel wants to convey a powerful message to our audience. Self-respect is the quietest and most potent form of revenge. True value is never defined by borrowed luxury or the fleeting approval of those who seek to diminish you, but by the integrity and legacy you build with your own hands. Hazel's journey is not merely a tale of a stolen wedding fund or a hijacked venue. It is a profound exploration of what happens when a person realizes their own worth in the face of absolute betrayal. To the parents in America, the ones striving to give their children the world, this narrative serves as a stark, necessary, cautionary tale. Your children are not emotional shock absorbers. They are not public relations campaigns, and they are certainly not disposable tools designed to elevate your social status in the neighborhood hierarchy. Authentic family education requires an unwavering commitment to equity, honesty, and emotional awareness. It demands that parents see their children for who they truly are rather than who they need them to be. When a family chooses to groom a golden child at the expense of another's future, they commit a dual tragedy. Favoritism only breeds deep-seated resentment and shatters the foundation of trust. More insidiously, it leaves the favored child dangerously ill-equipped for the realities of life. As we saw with Lexi, the golden child is armed only with entitlement and an artificial sense of superiority. They are handed a fragile castle made of sand and lies utterly defenseless against the harsh winds of the real world. This dynamic highlights a pressing need in modern American society, a society often obsessed with consumerism and the exhausting race to keep up with the neighbors. We must fundamentally rethink what we teach our children. Education must integrate financial management and social ethics into the core curriculum. We must teach the next generation that true wealth does not need to announce itself to strangers. Hazel's parents built an empire on lies and high-interest debt driven by a toxic, insatiable need for external validation. Predictably, it inevitably collapsed into dust. By prioritizing financial literacy, schools can empower students to protect their assets from exploitation, even when that exploitation comes from their own blood. Furthermore, by emphasizing behavioral ethics, we can foster a culture that values human dignity over relentless social climbing. Ethics is the absolute core of a stable society. Without it, any legacy you attempt to build is just a countdown to ruin. If life unexpectedly hands you a toxic family environment, I want you to listen closely to the message Hazel leaves behind for the youth. Invest in your own growth quietly and set immovable boundaries. You are not a disposable stepping stone for anyone else's ambitions. In traditional culture, we are heavily burdened with the idea that family loyalty is an absolute virtue, a covenant that must be honored at all costs. But here is a viewpoint that goes against conventional thinking, one that might feel terrifying to accept, but is vital for survival. Walking away from your parents is not inherently a moral failure. In fact, if maintaining a relationship requires your emotional destruction, your financial ruin, and your permanent silence, then the bond is already broken. As Hazel learned in the quiet solitude of her success, setting a boundary is not an act of malice. It is the necessary act of protecting your own peace. You do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. There is a profound, unshakable power in embracing your quiet era. When the people who were supposed to protect you are desperately seeking validation in the eyes of strangers, let your silence be your shield. Focus on self-reliance. Build your life in the shadows. Justice will eventually arrive. But it was the patience and strategic wisdom of Hazel Sanchez that allowed her to not only reclaim her honor, but to fundamentally dismantle the illusions of those who sought to exploit her. Let your success built on a foundation of absolute self-worth be the final undeniable answer to those who doubted you. If you have ever been the quiet one, the scapegoat expected to absorb the blows so others could shine, I want you to know that you are seen. There is an entire community of us who have learned to build our own tables when we were denied a seat at our families. Please take a moment to subscribe and follow Sophia Vengeance. Here we tell the stories of those who turned their pain into power. Join us and let us continually remind you that your worth is not defined by those who failed to love you. As you reflect on Hazel's journey, I ask you to look at the landscape of your own life. Look at the relationships you constantly nurture, the repeated transgressions you excuse, and the boundaries you hesitate to draw out of guilt. We spend so much of our lives waiting for apologies that will never be spoken, hoping for closure from people who do not possess the emotional capacity to understand the pain they have caused. But perhaps closure is not something you receive. Perhaps it is something you must decide. Forgiveness is universally preached as the only path to healing and moral superiority, but the truth is far more complex and perhaps a little darker. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from accepting that some debts will never be paid and some bridges are meant to stay burned. Letting go of the hope for a better past is the most terrifying yet liberating step you will ever take. You are the sole architect of your peace, and ultimately the only way to truly win a war against those who wish to consume you is to simply stop fighting. Lock the heavy iron gates and let the silence become your masterpiece.